You kind of like a pirate? It's a pirate life, really, isn't
It's
it?
a pirate's life.
This is an experience of the void.
Heavy metal and hardcore are loaded words. They're tied to cultures that really mean something to people. So I don't think we'll ever, as a group, harmoniously agree on what these words mean. However, there are certain values that are a part of this music that have traversed a 40-year journey from California's social distortion right through to Dillinger Escape Plan.
We started this band in 1979, and
Awesome.
the rest of the 99% of the world was telling us that we couldn't do this, and we said, "Oh yeah, watch us."
Do you come from that same place?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we grew up listening to just, initially a lot of us came from metal and stuff like that, but then the scene we found ourselves in was the underground, post-hardcore and hardcore scene, and we all came from the, New York, New Jersey, D.C. area where there's a lot going on and a lot of bands, the Cro-Mags and the Bad Brains.
HR from the Bad Brains.
He was insane in 1981 when I saw them first. I'm like, whoa.
Recently, it's fun. HR is definitely in his own little world, but back in the day, they were the best live band of all time. They changed aggressive music forever. In 78, when they started doing what they were doing, it was just blew the doors off of everything. In his lyrics and his voice, you can tell it's all him. There's no filter between his himself and his emotions and what's out there.
Within a sound or a scene, what's really interesting is the artists that leave the lasting impact, the most lasting impact, often don't sound like anyone else, but they always feel. And that whole insides on the outsides aspect of heavy music is something that endures.
Being able to sneak into the city and see all this crazy, dangerous, unpredictable subculture in music was extremely had a huge effect on me. Like I said, the metal world was what it was, but it was the hardcore and punk world that really shaped the attitude of just the work ethic and the attitude of you should be here to play and to kick ass and to have a cathartic outlet for all your emotions.
Both sides can affect the other, and I feel that that's more so with our side of music than others.
I have a sense of humor, and I understand that what we do is inherently silly, but there's just an idea of look, man, I'm not in this to party and get down. This is about burning off the worst parts of myself.
It's an indelible part of heavy music's cathartic shared experience. And whilst this video focuses on the American impact, this is a worldwide movement and continues to be as it splinters around the world, notably to a band of brothers in Brazil.
Even before we knew how to play, there was an attitude, We had these fights would break up on our shows, and even the guy that signed us, the Cogumelo guy's I don't like your music, but I have to say, it was entertaining, There was a fight, and you guys are crazy. I'm gonna sign you, So I think that kind of what drew maybe me and Igor into the punk scene too. We saw ourselves more actually less related to Dragons and stuff, more related to punk bands, do it yourself kind of spirit. Yeah. The whole Discharge and the Black Flag, Bad Brains. That was we really dig this. I think maybe we are metal, but I think somehow we are punks also. I don't know. Maybe because the spirit is there.
And also, I think not being in America or in Europe, for us, it was our naive way of looking into it. And that's, looking back now, it was really great that we had that. For us, we remember listening to certain bands, he said, Discharge, and putting them on the same level as Slayer, so it was no divisions.
When I think of punk, that's what I think of.
Yeah.
And I just love, tearing down stereotypes.
That doesn't mean an open borders approach to heavy music is always embraced.
In the mid-'80s, there was the punk rock police that said, oh, you can't sing a love song, or you can't cover a Johnny Cash song, or you can't, you can't wear baggy pants, or you can't. And I just love Oh, really? Were you there? Well, fuck you. Watch me. I do what I do. And that's, to me, punk was also about just individualism.
When we first started as a band, we played the Milwaukee Metal Fest. Everyone there had spikes and leather and just looked angry as hell and walked around like grunting. They even talked, you know, like. And we walked in. I remember I had a V-neck sweater and a bright red shirt sticking out. I think I was doing like homework or something, you know, like, you know, on the side. And we walked up to the door, and like a guitar player had like a blonde pompadour or something. And we're like, we're here to play the Milwaukee Metal Fest. And they're like, who the hell are you? We're like, Dillinger Escaping. He's like, dildo, what? There's no way you're playing this. They wouldn't let us in because we didn't have black and spikes and like all kinds of stuff.
In the 1980s, California's melting pot of bands also defied these laws, rules, and strictly defined genre expectations.
I used to go and see the Germs and the Blasters on the same bill, or Fear, and the Cramps, and I didn't leave there going, "Guy, you know,
I don't like what you wore tonight."
Germs weren't very rockabilly tonight, and the Blasters weren't very punk. You know, it was like it was all one underground scene.
On the other side of the country, the aforementioned New York hardcore scene birthed decades of artists and enthusiasts.
New York hardcore played a big role. Cro-Mags, Agnostic Front. Those are bands that were already mixing metal into hardcore before it was even a thing.
I remember reading an article of Metallica when they were doing Masters of Puppets, and they asked James Hetfield what he was listening to, and that was the first album. He said, "Oh, Cro-Mags, Age of Quarrel."
You grew up in the New York hardcore scene. Yes, I did. Bit of a flip there. Yes. Yeah. So can you tell us how that kind of informed your character as a creative person and stuff? Because I feel like that was a magic moment in, you know, music.
Yeah. Well, just the whole street urban mentality, and that's really a part of New York hardcore. If you know crews like DMS and IDS, bands like Madball, Sick of It All, Cro-Mags, Sheer Terror, all these bands that talk about urban living, urban lifestyle, urban struggles. That's something that we never had in music, especially heavy music before. It was like dragons and like witches, but this was a music that wasn't hip hop but came with that same hip hop mentality. And it was about us, and it was current, and it was relevant. It was our news, it was our bonding experience. So don't forget the struggle, don't forget the street, don't forget your roots.
The evolution continues, spearheaded by key players.
If it wasn't for Slayer, hardcore bands would have never started morphing into metal bands. And I think, you know, there were bands I was saying earlier about Agnostic Front and Cro-Mags, when the metal started to come in. But during my generation, so the early 90s, bands like Earth Crisis, for example, were one of the first people to really like bow down to Slayer and start bringing in those metal riffing in between the chuggy hardcore stuff. So they're kind of responsible. I think that it was tons of bands that worshipped at the altar of Slayer that helped morph the crossover style.
How do you think it's evolved? It's getting harder or getting softer?
It depends on each other. There are some bands that still have a sound kind of like ours, or Madball, or Agnostic Front, or that era. But then there's more of ones that got into later hardcore, like Shai Hulud, and they take more. They love hardcore, but they take more from the Pantera sound, and it begins to me to lose its. Because I'm older, it probably loses its soul. It sounds more mechanical.
Yeah.
But to that 15-year-old kid screaming those words, that's his heart and soul, his passion, you know? So I can't come down, like a lot of my friends come down on what some people call hard. They go, that ain't hardcore, blah, blah. You know what? It's to that person, it's their hardcore. You can't take away from that.
How all of these sounds and colors and flavors and riffs and tones cross over can be argued until the end of time. But the heavy music that we hold closest to our hearts, and this is a shared experience, does share something. And it doesn't matter how caustic and abrasive and confronting it sounds to people who don't vibrate on this frequency. Those values are important, and I think Tommy Buckley, the drummer for Crowbar, expresses it really well.
I just think it's really true from the heart. Everything's honest. It's real.
It's completely different, but it's still the blues, you know.
And is it any surprise that the blues of now, the soul music of our time, is darker and deeper and more aggressive than ever before? We need this. We need this shared experience.
You know, what Kirk feels, what we feel, what comes out.
The heart.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
This is an experience of the void.